Howdy, partner. Welcome back to the Wild West Bank. That's where I live. Today I wanted to talk about a particular subject that came from years of doing Kirov work. That's the outreach work, dealing with Jews and helping them discover what the world is really all about. One question that they used to bring up with me was, if I could see a big miracle, I would probably become a believer. That's all I need to do is see a miracle, and then I'd be a believer. You know, something like the parting of the sea, or maybe the hail falling from the sky with fire in it, or maybe the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm from Philadelphia, and I don't watch football, but I still keep up with the home team. Anyway, but that would be a miracle. The point is that people used to tell me all the time, that's all I need to do is see a miracle and then I would become a believer. And I saw recently an article that was talking about a tree that actually grew frogs. Wow, that sounds miraculous. Here we have a tree that the end of the branches, all these frogs should just pop out. That was good sound effects here. And that would be miraculous. But I have a question for you, and that is, if that is really happening, why is it miraculous? Well, it's because we're talking about something actually coming out of wood. A tree, here, I'll give you an example. These bookshelves that I have behind me, I have a stander that's over here. In fact, the very desk that you people are sitting on right now is actually made of wood. And we're talking about something just popping out of wood. It sounds fairly miraculous, doesn't it? But I would have a question for them too. Why does it have to be frogs? I just happen to have an item here, an apple. And this apple actually popped out of wood. And it's a question though, how is that not miraculous? How do we get an apple or a pear or a peach or an orange? Oh, I like oranges. Just popping out of trees. Does the tree really know how to make these apples? Does the tree have the design inside and say that, well, I think I'm a Macintosh tree and I'm just going to pop out some Macintosh apples? And I looked up and I found out that there's something like 7,500 varieties of apples on this earth. 7,500 different types of trees, and they each know exactly how to make that type of apple, or for that matter, any other fruit that they can pop out. So the question is, how is this actually happening? Well, evolutionary people tell you there's no problem. It's all by accident. In other words, just over billions of years, these trees, I guess they took some courses in it. I don't know how they did it, but they figured out exactly how to do this. They developed within those trees a way to send nutrients, water, everything that is needed for this apple through the tree and then make this delicious apple. But there's something more interesting about this apple than just the idea that it came from wood. Look at the design of it. This thing just happens to fit in my hand, almost like it was designed for me. No, I'm not going to eat it now. But this thing also, it has a beautiful cover to it. This is almost like it's a gift wrap for eye appeal. And every type of apple has different colors and different patterns and everything like that. This is gift wrapping. Why do I say that? It's because if I cut away the skin on this and I look underneath, what do I see? There's no gift wrapping pattern on the inside. It's almost like it was designed strictly for my eye appeal on the outside here. That's pretty amazing. In fact, to me, it almost sounds like it's by design. It doesn't sound like it's something that would be just by accident that it would happen. But let's get even more sophisticated here. Here, every tree has within its cells a genetic code. we're talking about that this tree actually has a computerized code within its cells to actually tell the tree at the end of your branches you're going to have Macintosh, you're going to have oranges, you're going to have pears. Wait a minute, this is a little bit more than just figuring it out over thousands or billions of years by accident. How does a computerized system work out like that? I refer back to the fact that for about 4 decades, close to 4 decades, I worked as an engineer. I was involved in different designs of missile systems, communication systems. I even worked on a satellite system for a little while. And each one of those systems that I was involved with, I never saw anything design itself. It was always human beings that had to go ahead and put the designs down and figure out exactly how to get this thing to work and get all the parts together. So it's a little bit difficult for me, especially with my background, to even think that even with billions of years, that something designs itself. How is that possible? Let's even get more sophisticated, and that is, we're not talking about just trees with fruit on it. We're talking about every living thing. You and I both popped out of our mothers. In other words, we are also of this same sophisticated design, that here our parents took their DNA, made it into a helix, and now popped me. It just happens to be similar to my parents. This doesn't sound like something that should happen by accident. This is extremely, in fact, infinitely more complicated in design than just a simple by accident that it happened. It's sort of crazy, even because the evolutionary people say, yes, it happened by accident, but it's also something called mutation and selected, I forgot what the terms are. Who cares? Because they don't know what they're talking about anyway. Mutation is a good example of something that if you took two chemicals and put it together and they mutated, they would be degraded. They would be at a lesser degree. Even what the evolutionary people say is that happened is totally impossible. It could absolutely not put together something like an apple or a human being by any means, just because of over time. Just a quick story. I mentioned the fact that I worked with a group that was actually driving satellites in space. It was very interesting work because I worked with 3 geniuses, PhDs, which I guess is pretty high degrees. I don't know what they. Anyway, they worked with these computers, coming up with millions of lines of code just to keep a satellite in a particular place in space. Why? Because, well, let's say you have something like a communication satellite that you want it to be exactly in the same place over the Earth all the time. It's over the equator, and as the Earth rotates, that satellite stays above. Now, how far does it have to be away? Well, something like 22,236 miles above the Earth is called a geosynchronous orbit. And it sounds like, okay, we put it up there and that's it. No, there are so many forces acting on this. We're talking about the sun, the moon, the gravitational pull as these things eclipse the particular heavenly bodies. We're talking about the planets. We're talking about the asteroids. Everything has an effect on it. The solar wind, all the different particles that come from the sun. There's so much happening, radiation and all. It goes on and on and on. So these 3 geniuses really had to have their all their lines together, knowing exactly how to write this code. This was not easy to keep one little satellite exactly in the right place so it would do its business. But an interesting thing is, I was once in a meeting with the 3 geniuses, and I asked them, I said, I'm sort of curious. It's so difficult to keep this one satellite in this one place in space. Who actually wrote the code for the Earth? And what's keeping the Earth in place? The Earth actually has more forces on it because of gravitational pull than the satellite. It actually has more problems staying in the exact same place. Yet for billions of years, it's been right where we needed it. If the Earth got closer to the sun, it would lose its atmosphere. If it went away from the sun, it wouldn't work. In other words, it has to be exactly in the right place within a tolerance, and it works. That the Earth has continued to be our home for all this time. So, who wrote the code? All of a sudden, I asked that question, and there was silence in the room. The three geniuses didn't have anything clever to say all of a sudden. So, it was very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about this thing called evolution. The idea of just accidentally happening by natural selection, by everything, all the weather and water and everything just causing to be in the right place, and over billions of years, just it happening. I'm not too sure exactly. I have two items in front of me here. One is a pencil. Whoop, there we are. This pencil just happened to be something that was found in a desert, and over billions of years it evolved. I'm getting strange looks already, I can tell. Well, why not? After all, this was originally just a stick that fell off of a tree, and there was some lead that happened to be on the ground, and it just got into the middle here, and there was some coloring that just got on the front of it. What, you don't believe that? You look at this simple little nothing called a pencil, and you would say to me, no, it's obvious just by looking at it that this was designed and it was made in a factory by human beings and all that. I mean, this is definitely something that was by design. But I got something else here. I got a blade of grass. Here, I'll show it to you. This blade of grass just happened to be by accident. In other words, but it's much more sophisticated than this pencil. Why is it? Well, there's actually a feeding system, a growing system that the cells divide and cause it to grow. There's a watering system that actually gets the nutrients that it needs to grow. It has a photosynthesis system that actually takes the energy from the sun. And wait a minute now. I'm talking about something that's much more sophisticated than this pencil. And you don't believe that this pencil could have evolved, but you could believe that this accidentally happened, that this thing, it has a computerized genetic system like everything else we were talking about. It starts to get a little bit ridiculous when we start to think that here, something much more sophisticated happened by accident, and something that's very simple, it couldn't have. We look at it and we say, no, that couldn't have evolved. It had to be made by people. I think we're getting into a situation here where how can people be so ignorant of everything? Well, one might ask the question, how can scientists, who are supposed to be some of the most brilliant people on the earth, how could they even look at things like this and say, no, this is definitely evolution. There's no designer. What? Well, one way they can say it, and this is a very interesting answer to that question, is it's their job. They actually get parnassa. They actually get paid for coming up with theories about how things worked, how things just happen to get thrown together through nature. You know, that this pencil just happened to be in the weather and the water and the way the wind was hitting and everything. It couldn't have been. This did, definitely. It doesn't make sense, but when you're talking about people who are depending upon putting bread on their table, because they have to come up with these theories. This is what they do every day. They go to work and they have to come up with it. If I told somebody, yeah, but just look into the Torah because the answers are already there. You don't have to do this trial and error thing. They probably would answer with, yeah, but I got to eat again tomorrow and I got to feed my family. So you're going to find that the whole thing really comes down to a financial thing, that it's their livelihood to actually come up with this silly stuff. It's an interesting thing that Darwin, as an example, he wrote in his book, I can explain everything except the eye. The eye is just way too sophisticated for me to be able to come up with an answer on how that evolved. It just came about. But if Darwin actually knew 150 years ago about cell structure, about DNA, about how there's a genetic code in every living thing that puts it together, and he saw that it was so sophisticated, so impossible for it to have just made itself. I mean, beyond designing, we're talking about infinite design that's involved in here. I think Darwin would have never even wrote the book. It's an interesting thing. But, and even the idea of the time going by that these things could form, that gets a little bit ridiculous too. There's actually, I'll give you an example, and then that'll be enough for today. There is a particular fish species that only exists in the Victoria Lake in Africa. This particular species, over the years, in fact before the 1950s, it was the only species that actually existed in that lake. It does not exist anywhere else in the world, but there are 500 variations of this one particular type of fish. Okay, it evolved in this one lake with this one particular type of fish, over 500 species, and it evolved. What's the big deal? The lake itself is only believed to be about 12,000 years old. So we're talking about a species that came about, developed into 500 different variations in 12,000 years. I don't believe this blade of grass could have even built itself over billions of years, let alone a fish and 500 different variations of it. I think you're starting to get the idea that evolution is really totally impossible. It's unbelievable. Well, is there such a thing as evolution? There actually is, and you will find it in scriptures talked about it, an evolutionary process. But we're talking about something where the designer actually takes step by step by step and makes the changes. In other words, Hashem is the one who's causing the evolutionary pattern. It's not by accident. It's not by natural selection or mutation or any other buzzword they want to come up with. In other words, the same one who designed the laws of physics, he created the laws of chemistry, he created the laws of biology, is the same one who wrote the Torah. And everything that we have in this world, you will find, is right there in the Torah. Everything is described, and there is no such thing as by chance. Everything is absolutely by design, and it's way too sophisticated for it to not be. Because, can this thing really accidentally just happen? This is a miracle. And if anybody says to you, oh, if I could just see a miracle, tell them to look around at everything. In fact, tell them to look in the mirror, point their finger and say, ooh, there's a miracle. I never noticed that one before, maybe. And you get the idea. Have a lovely... I thought I'd wrap this up, but then I thought of questions that can come up, and I might as well answer them before they come up on the comments area. One is the fact that there seems to be a tremendous find of prehistoric human-like beings that existed before Adam and Eve, before the first human beings. How do I explain all these different things like Homo erectus and I think Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon and all these different species that they came up with, that they've dug up their bones and they've actually seen these things. We have them all documented, all these different human-like species that existed before the first humans. The answer is, and you'll find it in scriptures, there were 974 different species that Hashem created before he did human beings. We even know how many. Scientists didn't get that part done yet. They didn't figure out how many. We know exactly, and we know exactly why they were created. Another long story that I'm not going to go into here, but it's just the idea that everything is in Torah. Everything is completely covered. The fact that every year there are thousands of new species of plants, of animals, of fish, of birds, and all, always discovered. Thousands never seen before. How does this happen? What happened to the evolutionary pattern that we didn't see any of these things? It's answered in the Torah once again, but it just lets you know that it's a little bit more sophisticated here than just by accident. So now, have a lovely day.